Hello and welcome to my speech on the pollution impacts of coal-fired power plants. I want you to take a deep breath. Now take another one. Air. It's all around us, a given. The air we breathe and the water we drink are more important to the sustenance of our lives than anything else. We take for granted that our air and water will be clean, but what if every breath you took or a glass of water you drank was contaminated with deadly pollutants? This is the case for thousands of people unfortunate enough to live near a coal-fired power plant. The effects of this pollution from coal-fired power plants are nothing short of detrimental to the small, often rural towns in which they're located. The multitude of invisible dangers presented by these plants to our children, our homes, and our lives are very real indeed. Now, while the effects are most concentrated in the small towns I'll describe, they can be seen for hundreds of miles around, often reaching into major cities that are thought to be safe from plant emissions carried on prevailing winds. Due to the dangerous nature of coal-fired power plants, a certain type of location is usually selected, and this selection is done for reasons unrelated to the physical site needs of the plant. A majority of the time, small towns are chosen to be hosts for these parasitic plants. You may be wondering why it is that they choose small towns. Why do small towns continue to be selected as a staging ground for these monstrosities? Well, the answer to this can be summed up in one simple word: jobs. According to the No Coal Coalition, a nonprofit organization, small towns are often more receptive to offers from plants based on a catalog of misinformation about the hazards linked to coal-fired power and the lure of jobs so desperately needed in the community. They promise a much-needed boost in the long, stagnant economy of these little towns, because many small towns in America feel the slump in our economy in a more pronounced way than the rest of the country. A new plant coming in offers a shot in the arm, if you will, bolstering the local economy and raising the number of available jobs in a very limited market. The promises made by incoming plants often fall very short of the mark, instead leaving a host of health issues and other problems in their wake. Nearly 24,000 lives are lost every year due to health issues directly linked to coal-fired power plants and toxic coal ash. In a letter from 35 physicians near a proposed coal plant site, it was noted that studies showed that the pollutants emitted from these plants are known to cause serious health issues, including but not limited to asthma, emphysema, COPD, brain damage, lung cancer. According to a CNN special on the consequences of coal ash, the Environmental Protection Agency's data shows that it is more dangerous to drink a glass of water contaminated by coal ash than to smoke a pack of cigarettes a day. People exposed to these contaminants face a very elevated risk of cancer, and as many as 1 in 50 people in these areas will get it. Clean coal technology is the latest thing, and it's touted by these plants to make safe the emissions that are created during the coal burning process. In some cases, the new technology washes the emissions, and then the plant releases what they call clean steam into the atmosphere. In others, the plant emissions are liquefied and pumped into the ground. This causes further contamination of the groundwater in an already fragile ecosystem. NBC environmental correspondent Ann Thompson states that clean coal is, in effect, an oxymoron. It leads people to believe that the emissions are actually safer than they are. According to this report, coal plants in the U.S. emit 2.1 billion tons of carbon dioxide every year. So this not only is very damaging to the local environment, but it contributes and has a large impact on our current global warming crisis. The environmental impacts and their long-term effects are often overlooked by the plants in favor of their economic impacts. The economic benefits created by the plant are most often seen directly by the power companies and not by the local community. The jobs and economic boost proffered by the power companies that run these plants are typically short-lived. The anticipation of a new plant sets off a flurry of activity in a small town. The town cleans itself up, new hotels are built to house all the construction workers coming in, new businesses spring up, old businesses roll out the welcome mat. They all hope for a little piece of the pie, a share in the money coming from the new plant during the construction phase. This can last for several years, depending on how long construction of the plant takes and how big the plant is going to be. But as construction draws to a close, the town starts to come to the realization that The small number of employees that they actually need to run the new plant pales in comparison to the hundreds of construction jobs that needed to build it. Even more startling to the townspeople is the fact that a majority of the maintenance jobs and direction jobs are given to outside engineers and plant professionals. Very few of the remaining jobs will actually go to locals. So as we see construction come to its end and production kick off, the true nature of the coal-fired power plant is revealed. The pollution begins to impact the local and surrounding areas just a few short years after the production gets underway. In an average year, it is said that a typical plant generates an astounding amount of contaminated waste, which holds toxic levels of mercury, arsenic, lead, and other heavy metals in deadly concentrations. As the pollutants build up in the air and water, the ill effects become more and more pronounced. Healthcare costs locally begin to rise as more and more people, especially children, become ill in response to the contaminants. Crops begin to die, and livestock becomes unsustainable. The lack of foresight in allowing a plant to be built in their town starts to become sadly apparent as the health of the community and its former industries begin to break down. Towns begin to falter and ultimately end up all but abandoned, mere shadows of their former selves. I recently went to Fayetteville Power Plant just to have a look around, and what used to be a quaint, charming little town is nothing. It's empty. When the toxins build to a level where local life can no longer be supported, the power companies simply buy out the locals, including homes, schools, and once flourishing businesses, leaving a veritable ghost town behind, as I saw in Fayetteville. Family farms and ranches in these rural communities that had stood for generations before the arrival of the coal plant are all but destroyed. If they refuse to be bought out by the power companies, they're rendered useless as toxic levels of pollution accumulate in the air, the ground, and the water. Still, other farmers are forced out of business from lack of available resources. According to the Union of Concerned Scientists, coal plants use approximately 2.2 billion gallons of water every year, which leaves little, if any, for crop sustenance and irrigation, either bankrupting the farmers or forcing the ever-present buyout and the loss of their livelihood. Finally, the town and its people give up, for there's literally nothing left to sustain them. Not air, not water, not jobs. All that seems to be left now is the plant. As we have seen, the effects of pollution from coal-fired power plants spread far and wide and are tantamount to a death sentence to the small towns where they're so often located. They are welcomed in. They consume all that these small communities have to offer and leave a legacy of death and destruction behind. More and more uninhabitable toxic ghost towns are springing up in the shadows of coal-fired power plants across our country, and the far-reaching effects of these plants are impacting a larger and larger area all the time. So as I walk hand in hand with my daughter through the show barn at the county fair here in small-town USA, the threat of another coal-fired power plant looms dark and ominous on the horizon of our quaint little town. I stop and I take a deep breath, and then I take another, and I can't help but wonder, are we next?